The TR-8S is Roland's flagship drum machine that takes the 808, the 909, the 606, 626, 707, pretty much any Roland TR drum machine that they came out with into one box. But for the 8S model, they included upgrades like advanced sequencing, sampling, added effects, a whole mess of stuff. So, as just a general type of how does this actually operate, let's go to a blank pattern. I'm going to go to kit, and then right off the bat I can see I can do an 808 style kit. And I can use the step sequencer here to construct a simple pattern. So let's start with some hi-hats, for example. Press start, and then now I have some hi-hats on the sequence. I just need to put snare drum and start to build my groove from scratch. And it's super easy. It's really approachable, and they did a really nice job at making it a really fluid type of programming experience. I can go back to hi-hats, add notes, add some toms in real time using the playpad. And then I can start to shape my drums. Like tuning the bass drum, for example. Adding things. It's a really fluid experience, and there's no barrier for entry, really. So one of the things that I like to do that's a little bit more advanced in terms of how intricate you can make your grooves, the last step function. So there's 11 tracks on the drum machine. If I use last step, that means I can take one track and make it a separate sequence length than the rest, which means I can go out of phase over time and get some more polyrhythmic stuff. Meaning, this is what our pattern sounds like now. But I'm going to go ahead and shorten the snare drum length to something a little bit more odd metered, like 11 steps. Now the snare drum track is offset, and I can go beyond that and start to mess around with the hi-hat, maybe make the hi-hat only 5 steps long. Take the open hi-hat, make it maybe 7. And I start to build these really interesting types of rhythmic variants all live, and it'll go across the entire sequence length. I've just been using 1 bar, but I can have up to 8 bars. So I can start to copy things. I can copy variation A to variation B here. Make my pattern, say, 4 measures long. And that last step will carry over however long the sequence is. So I can use this when I'm doing things live as kind of a way to get some variations. And then when I'm ready to turn it back to normal, I can just hit last step and then hit 16. And now it's all 16 steps in length, and I can resume kind of programming things normally. So it's a really kind of fun thing to do when you're improvising. I don't DJ, I just basically bring a drum machine and a few synths live, and I like to do this when there's a groove that's running stale or if I want to kind of change things up. So one of the cool things about the 8S that's not on the TR-8 or any other drum machine before it from Roland is not just the last step, but the sub-step. So I have my basic drum groove right here. Sub-step will basically take one of these steps and chop it in half, chop it into 3 parts, or chop it into 4 parts. So let's take the hi-hat pattern, for example. So I can take the closed hat. If I hold sub-step, I start to get these ratcheting rhythms, meaning these kind of fast types of rhythms that I can put on each step individually. I can change the speed of that as well. And it's all live. I don't have to stop the sequencer to do any of these changes. So it's a way to make something that's a little bit more complex, a little bit more rhythmically interesting. You hear it not just in trap music, but you can hear it in different types of beat music, or any kind of something that's not necessarily techno or house related. So in that way, the TR-8S can apply to many different types of genres, not just techno and house, the main thing of what it's known for. So we talked about last step, we talked about sub-step. These are kind of the more advanced sequencing features on the unit. You can do it all live. But I think we should talk a little bit about the sound aspect as well. Kind of like what makes the TR-8S sound unique beyond just the Roland drum sounds. Now, one of the things that I like to do is I like to maybe use some kind of classic Roland sounds, but begin to change the different types of instruments I'm using. So this instrument, for example, the cowbell, but I could just probably get rid of that, unless you really like cowbell. Some people really enjoy cowbell, and that's great. You can keep it in there, you know, it doesn't really matter. But I can load in my own samples as well. I like to build samples using Ableton and kind of use something that's a little bit more of a pad-based types of sound. So if I check out, let's take a look. What does pad 1 sound like? That sounds pretty cool. It's basically just an audio sample that I made and then I ported it into the TR-8. But I can start to put that sound in the sequencer as well. So I'm gonna hit start, play the unit, and then hit where the track that sample is on, and put it on the sequence. Now already, it kind of has a little bit more of a rhythmic type of thing happening. But on the TR-8S, there's a decay knob, which is really helpful, which gives me a little bit more of that kind of amplitude control, just hands-on. Now already that kind of sounds a little bit like something. And I can start to build my drum groove around that. Like, it's so easy. You know, it's a very kind of fluid way to do it. So I actually got a request to talk a little bit about what you can do with the sound beyond just triggering it. And you can do a lot. You can pitch it up and down, in course, in semitones, and that's super easy to do. You can press and hold. Well, let's talk about actually the third row knobs here. So there's tune, which I kind of messed with earlier with the, and that's a very kind of a 2-octave range, very kind of fine resolution, meant for kind of these micro tunings. We have decay, and then we have this mysterious control knob, which may do one thing on one track and it may do something on another track, which basically means that I can assign this track's control knob to be decay, filter, attack of the envelope, an effect control. It could be anything. And a shortcut for the TR-8S users in the room here is if you press and hold Control Select and then move the knob, you can actually change that assignment. And you know what the camera angle won't show you here is that I'm actually looking at all the different things that I can send it to, like coarse tune, sample rate, bit reduction, that type of thing. So I'm going to change it to coarse because I want to tune the sample on coarse adjustments. Now let's play back, see what it sounds like. So I'm going to press and hold one of the notes on the sequence. Press and hold another note on the sequence and now move the knob to a tuning that I want, maybe up a fifth. So now it's remembering that tuning and it's assigned it to the sequence now. If I have another note here, I can press and hold that and move the control knob to another tuning. Now it's a little bit more melodic. I'm actually like starting to build a track that sounds a little bit more interesting, a little bit more melodically interesting than just kind of the same sample over and over again. So beyond that, what the TR-8S has in terms of control, how do you kind of control these sounds without actually using your hands? There's actually an LFO that's built into each drum kit. That's an LFO is a way to control different parts of the sound over time. And the TR-8S has one in a drum machine, which is kind of unheard of, but you know, they were like, why not? So what I can do with that is I could take this pattern right here. And I can go into the instrument edit screen. I can scroll over to where it brings me to the LFO section. And I can see that I can send the LFO to the tuning, kind of getting a vibrato type of sound. Kind of sounds a little bit wavy, like I'm in some sort of daze from a party from the night before or something. Or I can send it to things like decay, level, pan. I can make it do some stereo stuff. So now it's like kind of panning around the room. You know, making a little bit more of a production at this point. But one thing I like to send it to is the filter cutoff. For every sample that you load into here, it gives you a dedicated filter along with some dedicated effects that you can mess around with. Now the LFO on a filter cutoff sounds like pretty traditional, but on a drum machine, it actually gives you a lot more genre expandability to what kinds of sounds you can use with. So if I do a little bit of tweaking here, I can assign that filter to the cutoff. Maybe go into the filter section and then turn up the resonance a little bit. And then go to where the LFO speed is, and then I can start to mess around with how fast it is. And it's a really kind of fun way to animate a sound. And if I want to kind of add some more effects on it as well, I have things like bit crushing to kind of make it a little bit more grimy and lo-fi. So I can take the sample and then apply the bit reduce, which will kind of give it more of a lo-fi type of edge. And that, see, I have the LFO applied to it now. So if I want to kind of taper that down a little bit, there we go. And then we go to the filter cutoff section here. Turn up the bit reduction. It gets very kind of harsh sounding and very intense. And I can use that to emulate different types of like lo-fi sample, like samplers or ASR 10s, MPCs, that type of thing. So there's a lot of sound shaping that you can do with it, and when you're building it along with the beat, it becomes a little bit more of a production. I can start to load in melodic samples like vocal samples, or kind of just sine waves, and start to build melodies too. So let's try that. I can go into another instrument that I want to sub out, and then let's find a sound that we like that has just one note. Do the same control knob assignment where I hold control select, move the control knob to change it to the tuning parameter. And start to add in some notes. And then press and hold each step that the note is on and move the control knob. That's how you basically make a melody on a drum machine too. The TR-8S allows you to do that by just basically remembering all those tuning automations, and you're able to do it all live without stopping the sequencer. So for TR-8S owners that are in the room, there's a couple more shortcuts that I want to cover that basically allow you to do a lot of quick sound edits on the fly using the send effects. So we have the reverb and a built-in delay. So if I turn up these and quickly turn off the sends here. So I can take that melody right here it's on the crash cymbal track, so I can hold that instrument, the CC button, and then move the reverb level up. And that actually sends that one track to the reverb. And I can do that for any instrument while it's playing. Like the snare drum, I can send to the reverb that way. And adjust the kind of the amount. Same thing with the hi-hats. And then when you're not holding anything, the reverb level becomes just that. It's just the return level. So it's a really fluid interaction that you have from sending different instruments to the reverb and then adjusting the reverb level live. So you can do kind of a transition type of thing pretty easily. Like if I'm getting ready to change the pattern somehow, I can take away the kick. And then have direct control over the entire reverb section of my drum kit, and I can just adjust that on the fly. So it's a really kind of simple trick that people do, but I think it's really effective. And the same way that you send effects is applied to the delay as well. Because the delay lets you have not just level, but time and feedback control. It gives you a little bit more flexibility in terms of the sounds that you can get, but let's just try it out with a snare drum, for example. Press and hold the snare drum, and then move the delay level. And it becomes this like really cool trick that you can kind of take these sounds and then do these short-term delay sends. I don't know if anybody listens to dub or dub techno, but it's like, you know that effect, and it's very easy to do that on here. And the TR-8S actually goes so far as to include a tape echo emulation too for everybody that's like super into dub music. That sounds super fantastic. So probably one of the things that ties everything together with the TR-8S, beyond just the instrument editing, beyond just the sequencing, is the master effects section right here. Now this is a kind of an easy creative tool to use when you're doing live stuff. So I have this basic drum pattern here. And if I want to start to use the master effect, it usually defaults to just a simple multi-mode filter. So if I turn that on, I hit the on button, and then I can have access to both high pass and low pass filters and things like that. Now what's cool is that, like the tuning, I can actually automate that effect as well. So if I'm doing something that's a little bit more creative, I can hit the record section on the motion right here, which will allow me to record any kind of knob movements. And I can do things like automate whether this is turned on or off. Now it's kind of turning that effect on and off as a part of the sequence. And if I want to get rid of that, I could just press and hold the on button and then hit the motion on button, which is also the same command for erasing stuff. So basically, if you want to erase anything, you hold the motion on button, which is the erase button, and then you touch whatever control that you want to get rid of. But you don't just get a multi-mode filter with the master effects. If you hit shift and on, that's where you can access the entire catalog of the TR-8S master effects. So beyond just that, they have things like compression, overdrive, distortion, fuzz, bit crushing, like the list goes on. One of my favorites is actually the SBF, which is sideband filters. So any Roland head will know that sideband filters are lifted from the V-Synth GT, which sounds absolutely crazy. You can kind of hear it's like a kind of a, it's like a comb filter type of. It's like a comb filter type of effect that you can route all your stuff through, which I think is really interesting. And then as far as like recording that on the sequence goes, like that's super fun to do as like a drum fill. Here, let's change it to bandwidth. So if I just want to kind of get a touch of that, I can hit record on the motion section and then just put it in on the sequence right here in real time. It gives me like this kind of like interesting tonal quality to it as well. It's like making a note out of nothing, out of just like drum sound. So I think it's a really kind of fun thing to experiment with, and especially when you're kind of when you're designing sound, you don't have to think about just individual instruments. You can think about the whole kit. Like use this thing as a way to get drum loops and like weird sounding percussion into your productions. You know, it's really easy to go USB into your computer where you can stream all the audio into your sessions directly. And this doesn't even need to be your main drum kit. It could be just a source of getting a really cool, interesting melodic and rhythmic loops. Everybody, thank you. We have a booth out there, so come hang out and talk with me, and thanks very much.